Welcome to This Explainer. Before Adolf Hitler really dominated the European landscape, there was Benito Mussolini. Today, we're going to unpack the life of the man who literally created the world's very first fascist state. It reads almost like a dark, cautionary storybook tale of history that we're going to unpack together. We'll explore exactly how his unchecked ambition basically became the blueprint for global authoritarianism. We'll look at how he gained absolute power, ruled with an iron fist, and how the whole shebang inevitably collapsed under the sheer weight of his own extreme ideology.
Okay, let's dive into this. It's an incredibly wild paradox. I mean, how exactly does a guy who started out as a humble schoolteacher rise up to become one of the most feared dictators in all of Europe? Mussolini kicked off his political journey making these massive, grand promises to the Italian people, absolutely vowing to restore Italy to its ancient imperial glory. But instead of actually delivering on that promise of strength and prosperity, well, he ultimately led his entire country straight into devastating war and total collapse. To understand how he made that drastic transformation, we've got to look at exactly where he started.
So Mussolini's roots were actually incredibly humble, just a very standard working-class background. He was born in 1883 in a small Italian town called Predappio, the son of a blacksmith and a schoolteacher. Growing up in a super politically active household, he actually followed in his mom's footsteps at first, working as a young man as a teacher and then later kind of finding his voice as a journalist. And it's wildly ironic, given his terrifying legacy, that he didn't start out with the extreme right-wing views he's so infamous for today. His early life was characterized by something entirely different, setting the stage for just a massive turning point. Right, so in his early career, Mussolini actually championed socialist ideas. But then the outbreak of World War I happened, and it was a massive catalyst for him. It completely fractured his ideology. As the First World War progressed, he basically abandoned socialism entirely and took a violent, sharp shift to the right. Suddenly, he was out there advocating for highly aggressive nationalism and massive military expansion. He literally went from championing the working class to championing the absolute military dominance of the nation-state. But, a single guy's changing ideology isn't quite enough to capture an entire nation. He needed the right environment. Think of this like setting the scene of a really tense story. After World War I, Italy was a nation in deep, deep crisis. The country was just drowning in severe economic problems, and unemployment was absolutely soaring. On top of that, political instability was basically the norm, which led to massive, widespread public dissatisfaction. But maybe the most volatile element of all this was the psychological blow. See, a lot of Italians felt deeply betrayed. Even though Italy had fought on the winning side of World War I, the public strongly felt their country hadn't received the territorial and economic rewards they were promised. So you have a nation full of frustrated, struggling people who are desperately looking for a savior. It was the perfect chaotic environment for a new extremist movement to take root.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how Mussolini didn't just use promises to take advantage of that public unrest. No, he used fear. In 1919, he officially founded the Fascist Party, promising to restore national pride, fix the broken economy, and entirely crush any political opposition. And to enforce this, he mobilized a paramilitary wing famously known as the Black Shirts. They were essentially his personal enforcers. They used blatant intimidation and intense physical violence to silence political opponents. By utilizing this terrifying network, the fascists rapidly began to gain a really chilling level of influence all across a destabilized Italy. All of this escalating terror finally climaxed in 1922 with the infamous March on Rome. This was a massive, highly calculated show of force. Mussolini organized his fascist supporters to physically descend upon the capital. Faced with this absolutely overwhelming political pressure and terrified of sparking an all-out civil war, the ruling monarch, King Victor Emmanuel III, well, he simply folded. He invited Mussolini to form a government. Just like that, literally without a single vote being cast in a national election, this former schoolteacher and journalist was handed the reins of the nation. He officially became Italy's prime minister. But as we know, getting power is one thing, right? Keeping it is a whole different story. Once he was in power, the newly appointed prime minister went to work systematically dismantling Italy's democratic institutions. Step 1, he banned all opposition parties, which effectively made it illegal to organize against him. Step 2 was restricting the freedom of the press, ensuring that only his carefully crafted pro-fascist narrative ever reached the public. And finally, Step 3, he systematically imprisoned or physically silenced any remaining critics. Step by agonizing step, he completely choked out democracy, centering all power and requiring absolute loyalty directly to his newly forged one-party fascist state.
Believe, obey, fight. It's chilling, isn't it? This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a demand for complete psychological control over the population. Mussolini cultivated this massive, incredibly powerful personality cult to guarantee his absolute grip on the nation. And how did he pull that off? Through relentless state-sponsored propaganda, enormous theatrical public rallies, and strict absolute control over the nation's education system and media. He demanded extreme nationalism, rigid discipline, and unquestioning support. You see, under this regime, you weren't supposed to think critically about the government at all. Your only role in society was to believe, obey, and fight for Mussolini.
So, with absolute control secured at home, Mussolini started turning his ambitions outward during the 1930s. He wanted to aggressively expand Italy's empire. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia, and shortly after that, they aggressively intervened in the Spanish Civil War. Concurrently, Mussolini started seeing a mutual benefit with the rising dictator over in Germany, Adolf Hitler, and began forming a really close alliance with the Nazis. This whole thing culminated in the signing of the Pact of Steel in 1939, officially locking in their military and political cooperation. And, for sure, it was this dangerous friendship that inevitably pulled Italy straight into World War II in 1940, firmly on Germany's side.
So, the crucial point is that entering the war was really the beginning of the end. Despite years and years of relentless propaganda claiming Italian invincibility and unmatched military dominance, the reality on the ground was an absolute disaster. Italian forces suffered repeated, devastating military defeats across multiple fronts, especially in North Africa and Greece. As the Axis powers started losing the broader war, the grand illusion that Mussolini had built, it completely shattered. The Italian people were suffering immensely, and as a direct result of these glaring military failures, public support for the dictator rapidly and steeply plummeted. The collapse from there was incredibly rapid. By 1943, following the Allied invasion of Italy, Mussolini's own government actually turned on him. He was totally removed from power and arrested. Now, German forces did quickly rescue him and propped him up as a puppet leader in northern Italy, but his real authority was completely gone. The final chapter of his downfall came in April of 1945. As Allied forces advanced, Mussolini attempted to flee the country. He was captured by Italian partisans and executed. In a stark, incredibly grim symbol of the total collapse of fascist rule, his body was later displayed publicly in a square in Milan. When we look back at Mussolini's legacy today, we're basically looking at a blueprint that inspired devastating global authoritarian movements. He literally introduced the world's very first fascist regime. And, while he promised his people a return to strength and ancient glory, his actual legacy is one of severe repression, harsh censorship, disastrous military campaigns, and just untold suffering for millions of people. The distance between what he promised when he first took power and the absolute ruins he ultimately left behind is incredibly vast. Which leaves us with a really critical question to think about. How easily can economic crises and unchecked authoritarian power completely alter the course of history? Mussolini's story isn't just a dry recounting of facts. It's a clear, urgent reminder of exactly how vulnerable a society can be when it's facing political instability and economic hardship. It shows us, step by step, how quickly a democracy can be dismantled when absolute power goes unchecked. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this history has given you a powerful framework for understanding not just the past, but the enduring fragility of democracy